Hello friends, and welcome back to the Jank Diver Gaming YouTube channel. My name is Timothy Zaccanino, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with TPug, a community member of ours, about a recent victory that they had in a new initiative that we're doing on our channel, which I'll explain here in just a moment. You're going to see a deck list on here for a really sweet red-white humans deck. Before we get into it and introduce TPug, I do want to remind people that we are a cube-related community, even though we're talking about historic Brawl today. And you can find links to our Discord in the description down below this video. If you want to get in on the Brawl action that we're talking about today, just find the link to our Discord, come join up, and let us know that you're here for the Brawlbarians League, and we'll get you started from there. But super cool new thing that we're trying out, and it seems like it's caught a little bit of attention. Brawlbarians, as I'm calling it, is a stipulation-based Brawl format, where the players who join up will be given a couple of stipulations at the beginning of each new league, and they will build an artisan-based deck determined by those stipulations. So you see here, everything that we're looking at, uncommon or common, based on a couple of stipulations, which we'll talk about how TPug approached those. And you just play against everybody else in the league, and whoever wins the league, whoever has the best record, gets to pick the stipulations for the next league, which is really cool way to incentivize people to win and build good decks while also giving them some freedom to pick and choose what they want to play while also restricting what they can play. So with that out of the way, if you're interested in joining us, come let us know. It's been a really good time. We're actually on stipulation number 2 already, which I'll let TPug also talk about how they're approaching the second set of stipulations. But TPug, first off, thanks for taking the time to talk to me about this. I want to do these little interview style things for the winner of each league. Hopefully it's not just you every time. But, you know, if it is, it is. But first off, how you doing? Second off, tell us a little bit about yourself. And third off, let's jump into this deck list.
Sure. Doing great today. As you mentioned, I went undefeated in this week's league, which I don't think will happen again, so I'm taking the moment to really gloat about it because everyone else seems to kick my butt when it comes to the actual cube drafting. So I figure I could celebrate this this time.
Yeah, TPug went 9-0, by the way. We had a 10-person league and went straight up 9-0 and beat every single person. These were best of 1 matches, so, you know, maybe if it was best of 3, everybody would have stomped you, but you definitely got us all in the first round.
Yeah. And when I've been excited about this because I play a lot of Historic Brawl, and one of the reasons I really like the league is that it pushes you out of your comfort zone for the most powerful cards, both in terms of rarity and because of the restrictions. It really limits what you're able to play, and I find that's really interesting, and you can see the people getting excited about brewing with the restrictions.
For sure. And just to go over what our stipulations were. So the way I did this was, everybody who joined the league, I asked them to come up with 2 stipulations of their own. And like I said, the winner of each league gets to pick the next round of stipulations, but we had to get started somehow. So I just randomly rolled the die out of all of the stipulations that were given. And we rolled the 2, help me with this. So the first one was like a typal thing, right? Every creature in your deck had to share a creature type, and you had to play at least
20 creatures.
Yeah, at least 20 creatures of that type, and that included your commander. So your commander had to ostensibly be a creature that gave you like some sort of thematic bonus for whatever other creatures you were playing in your deck, and you couldn't play any creatures that were not of that type. So you see here, Théoden, obviously, human noble. I'm sure you went noble, tried nobles, right? And it just didn't work out, so you stuck with humans. But the second stipulation for us was that no card in your deck could be featured in the Jank Diver Gaming Peasant Cube, the 450. So we couldn't play any of the cards that we're used to playing, which is a lot of the really powerful cards on Arena, and you'll note that we're also rarity restricted here, so it shrinks the card pool down quite a bit. So TPug, talk to me about how you landed on humans, and if you experimented with anything else before you landed on Théoden as your commander.
You know, I went humans pretty much like straight out the bat. I've been playing Magic for a long time, and there have just been so many cards that are human-centered. And especially with Lord of the Rings, where a lot of them care about humans, or some of the Innistrad cards care specifically about humans, I knew that was the place where I wanted to start, because there are just so many humans. And with the rarity restrict with the peasant cube, I was able to then look and just filter and say, okay, what humans are in here that we have? And I noticed that the Copper Coat Vanguard, which makes sense. It's an aftermath card, but it's a mini lord for humans. And then once I saw that I could play Copper Coat Vanguard, I went, okay, I'm playing some sort of white-based human deck because I assume it's a little parasitic for the cube, which is why it was out, or it might be a little too strong. But for me, that was the going point where I was like, okay, I'm definitely playing white humans. What's the best aggressive white human commander I can find?
Right, and we noticed a couple people in the league. It was kind of split between people who wanted to build the strongest possible deck they could and people who wanted to build like the most fun or interesting deck they could. And it's a little weird, obviously, to have that split because obviously you're incentivized to like try and win this so that you get to shape what the next environment looks like. Talk to me about your approach. Did you go for fun? Did you go for power? Did you go somewhere in the middle?
I play a lot of Historic Brawl, and I'm always sort of pushing and tinkering with my decks. So for me, this was just a really great exercise where I just let my brain sort of go forward. And what I landed on was with Théoden, Trample becomes very strong, and so does Discover. So when I had those two sub-themes, and there just being a natural glut of like aggressive Boros cards, led me to a spot where I could have lots of creatures that had trample or some ability that gave them trample, and then some sort of discover ability that would push the game into my favor. So a lot of times with Théoden, you can have creatures, you give them, double strike and they just get chump blocked. With, something like Crop Entangler, Sunrise Cavalier, or just any of the other things that give trample, it really made it just build your own Embercleave with a Cascade sub-theme to sort of push it over the top before the game went too long, with just getting like free spells. I think I had one game with Capricordi Sunborn, the 4/4 for 4, where all my other creatures were dead, but I was able to use him and just tap my equipments and just keep discovering to like churn out the game.
And I think, like, talking to some of the other people you beat, myself included, I think some of the standout cards, which I'll let you talk about what you thought were your standout cards, but Atali's Favor came up in conversation. I think you killed Teld so hard with Atali's Favor that we actually just added it to the Peasant Cube. Like, we're just regularly impressed by how good this card was, and I guess it was just, like, such a backbreaker in your match against Teld that we just agreed we should be playing this in our Peasant Cube. And then what's the 5-mana sorcery? The Daring Discovery. It kind of looks dorky to me. Like you wouldn't think this would be a key card, but I think you killed me with it, and I'm sure you had got good use out of this elsewhere.
Yeah, I actually saw that from another list that one of the players who was playing Zada put, and I just saw it and my eyes went wide, and I was like, holy crap, this is so good. And that's what led me down the Discover path, and a lot of the other creatures that discover are humans too, so that worked out. And I also have been similarly impressed by Atali's Favor, where I'm thinking about including that into my cube at home as well, just because it felt so powerful. What
were some of your other big standouts here? I mean, I felt like in my match against you, I was playing Blue-Red Wizards, but I think I built my deck to be a little bit too slow. Like, I felt like I was behind the entire game and never really got to a point where I pushed in favor. Like, I don't know if you won a bunch of die rolls or if you felt like there were certain cards that were consistently just pulling their weight for you, but like, what were your standouts from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to talk about, where I was only on the play 2 out of my 9 matches.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I looked through and did the stats on that. And for me, the cards that stood out to me were obviously the cards that gain Trample and Discover. But what was really impressive to me was actually Due Diligence, the aura from MKM, Murders at Karlov Manor, because it allowed me to play defense and attack, and oftentimes it was giving a double striking trampler +2/+2 as well. And I can't say enough about Hexgold Sledge being very powerful. Even it felt kind of against the restrictions, it's the alchemy card that has for Mirrodin, makes a rebel, and then also a Goblin Cavalier. And that came up in our match where you were trying to bounce all my creatures, assuming they would have the same type, when I had a rebel, a goblin, and a few humans.
Yeah, I thought I found the secret. Well, I did find the secret tech for this. It was I believe the name of the card is Selective Snare. It's blue X sorcery, bounce X creatures with the same creature type. Not something you normally see, but I thought it would be like the big game breaker for this. And I drew it in a lot of matches where it was good, but it was decidedly like terrible against you. Well, not terrible, it was still like bounce 3 things or whatever, but you, like you said, Hexgold Sledge by itself makes a goblin warrior and a rebel with no other creature types in addition to your other humans. So like I drew the Selective Snare and it's supposed to be my like 4-for-1 against you or whatever, but you just somehow managed to diversify all your creature types. Not to mention Hexgold Sledge is just a really powerful card in general. I have it highlighted here because it is an alchemy card, and a lot of people might not actually know what it does. But Goblin Cavalier is I believe it's a 1-mana 1/1, and it gets +2/+0 for each equipment on it. And I think it just has native trample. Is that right?
Yeah, it just has native trample.
Yeah, so I also made the mistake of like blocking while it had a Hexgold halberd on it, which I forgot gives it first strike, so I just ended up taking a bunch of damage there too. So yeah, the equipment, I get, like, you could say it's not in the spirit of the stipulation because it makes like non-human creatures, but I think part of the stipulations too is like trying to find the like little nitty-gritty workarounds to it. Like I think it's perfectly fine to make a rebel token as long as you followed the stipulation of everything needs to be a human, like written on the card in your deck. I don't know if that feels like dirty to you or whatever, but I feel like that stuff's fine.
It was good to play with in terms of within the restrictions, because I think as the restrictions get more intense, you need to find edges like that. I think the other thing that made this deck successful was that I intentionally played a high amount of basics. I played about like 24 basics, knowing that I really wanted my lands to enter untapped and be able to punish people that had slower mana bases or wanted to play 3 colors, and I think that also really worked in my favor.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask what your opinion on alchemy was in general, because we had a lot of pushback. Like about half of the people didn't want to play with alchemy cards at all, and the other half were kind of on the side of like, well, we're doing this restriction that allows these cards, why wouldn't we play with them? And I see you actually have quite a few of them, probably in the ballpark of like 4 or 5 that I'm looking at here. Some of the good ones being like Shove Aside and Patriarch's Humiliation, Hexgold Sledge. Like, do you actively want to be playing with alchemy cards, or would you prefer that they were not part of the environment that we're sculpting?
I think, unfortunately, they're here to stay on Arena, and they're going to continue making more of them, and they'll be better at hitting the mark about power level. I totally understand not wanting to include them just at a baseline since we're curating the environment so much, but I think there's a reason we're playing digitally, and that's because we can't play in person. We might as well play with the tools that we see online for them. And I have, obviously a complicated feeling about it, but I think in a stipulation like this, where there are so many restrictions already, adding alchemy in terms of a more arbitrary personal feeling, I think takes away from the possibility of creativity. And we've even gone so far to limit some of them. Like, you've limited everyone that gave like a spell book that could create a rare, right? And I can see a situation where you might want to ban some that are too powerful. But I think in general, it's better for the creativity of what we're trying to do for Brawl than it is like either one way or the other, like alchemy is the worst thing or the best thing to happen. I think because they're commons and uncommons, they're generally going to be more interesting than a regular common or uncommon.
Right, and I think a lot of the poo-pooing of alchemy, for lack of a better word, is that like the cards are noticeably usually the best cards that you have access to, though that's not necessarily true. Like, looking at your deck, there's this actually weird feature of the second stipulation. Like, we talk a lot about the human aspect of the deck and the typal variants and stuff like that, but the other stipulation was that we couldn't play cards that weren't in the 450 card peasant cube, the Jank Diver Gaming cube. But just as written, what that means is you could play cards that we've like soft banned for power level reasons from the peasant cube, right? So for instance, you have Imidane's Recruiter in your deck, which is a hyper powerful card that we removed from the peasant cube for being too good, but because of how the stipulation was written, you actually get access to Imidane's Recruiter here. Whereas you would think like the intentions behind that rule is that you're supposed to be like dumbing down the power level of your cards, but a couple things slipped through the cracks because they're actually too good for the Peasant Cube. I think we saw Sir Conrad in someone else's deck, which is another card that we've removed from the Peasant Cube for a very long time for power level reasons. But to the listener, if this sounds like maybe there may be some power level concerns, like we are giving our players the option to veto cards essentially after a league is done. If people felt like something was a bit too overwhelming, like consistently against a number of different people, they can bring it to trial and we'll all vote whether or not we want to remove it from future leagues, which I think we just did with Sir Conrad as well. It seemed people were displeased with Sir Conrad being a card that we could play in this environment. I don't know how you feel about Recruiter necessarily. It did kill me. It did definitely kill me in our match, but I'm sure you got good mileage out of that one.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as on the changes or have as great of an idea of how that cube changes, so I wasn't necessarily thinking about the power outliers. With Recruiter, there certainly is a power outlier. Just giving your team +1/+0 and haste itself is practically a 3/2 with haste, and then also double strike was a very powerful card. That's probably generally one of the top 3 cards in this deck, I would say.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely in the top handful. It has to be. I guess with that being said, individual cards and whatnot, like what were your other standouts, takeaways, before we talk about like the upcoming set of restrictions?
To give a shout out to my boy Axguard Armory, the land that searches for an RN equipment. I just love having value in my mana base, and having a land that draws 2 cards where you can continually cast a creature is really powerful. And I was really impressed with Hero of the Nyxborn, the enchantment creature from one of the Theros Reborn that makes 1/1 human and itself is a human, so it triggers Théoden twice. And then if you target it with something, say one game where I gave it Due Diligence, it just completely blew people out. It was very powerful.
Yeah, Teld's still complaining about that. Yeah.
For always one last one, Ambitious Farmhand, like just playing lands are good. Hitting your land drops is nice. I recommend playing that in almost every white deck you can put your hands on.
Yeah, that's a good question as well that I didn't actually think of until now, is like for future events, maybe for this one as well, like do you have a certain approach to like your mana base? Because mana is notably like pretty bad at the peasant level. Like it's just a bunch of like non-utility tap lands, and like maybe you get those thriving lands in there for additional things, but for the most part, like mana bases are going to be slower. You said you played a lot of basics here, but does that concern you at all for like future events? I see you have a couple MDFCs as well, which artificially adds to your land count.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Sam Black's just play more lands in your commander deck, and I think that holds true on Brawl, even with the free mulligan. Generally, I like to play 38 to 40 lands in my decks, even if I'm being really aggressive, and trying to be very intentional about the lands that I do put in. So here, like Secluded Courtyard and Unclaimed Territory are basically just plateaus in my deck, and playing a lot of basics, like I mentioned before, to make sure that my lands enter on top so I can get the advantage of playing low to the ground and aggressive. I think in the future, though, it's really important to be able to find the value in your mana base, especially because you can't rely on fetch lands or triomes in this league, because we're playing with those uncommon restrictions. So I think it's going to be really important to figure out how to get value out of your mana base.
For sure. So I do want to ask real quick, to close things out, I want to ask about the upcoming stipulations, but did you have anything else you wanted to mention about this red-white deck? I mean, 9-0 is pretty impressive. Like, you would assume that you would drop a game in there somewhere, but it's very impressive to just win every single match. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this red-white humans deck before we talk about the upcoming restrictions?
Yeah, I played a lot of the 3-mana Tajic in Historic Brawl for a while, basically before before Ragavan came to the format. So I was pretty aware with like what kind of split between creatures and spells I want intuitively. And I think I just built this deck in the very same image of that.
Yeah, you actually don't have like a ton of straight up removal spells, which I'm looking through now, and it's like you've got a couple, but like between your instants and sorcerers, you have maybe 3 to 4. So just play creatures, beat down hard, and kill the opponent. I guess is the name of the game here.
Also, just I don't want to say like faltering, like making your creatures unable to block. Obviously, it's good where you can't prepare for everything that's going to happen. So the best thing to do is to like remove a blocker, gain some tempo, make sure that your creatures aren't trading; they're just beating your opponents with some combat tricks, or they're being forced to chump, and then continuing to try and put the pressure on. I find is better than trying to be reactive with removal.
And I think that's actually where my deck faltered a little bit. Is I had a low creature count for my Adelies deck and probably a higher than necessary removal count, but I found that I just fell behind decks that were playing to the board, and I should have thought about that. Like, we're playing typal decks, right? They're going to be creature based. People are going to be curving out 1, 2, 3 with their creature of choice, and I didn't really respect that enough. But it looks like you did, and it got you a lot of W's this time. To move in and close out things, you got to pick the next set of stipulations based off of the ones that people originally offered. Why don't you tell us what those stipulations were, how you landed on them, and what your approach to building your next deck is?
Sure. I think Teld called me out for being kind of meanie, where I picked two very difficult restrictions, mostly because I didn't want to see them as like, throwaways, or didn't want them to be paired with something where I was really excited. So I chose pacifists, where creatures can't natively attack, and the one where you can only have one creature as your commander. There can be only one. I don't know exactly what it was called. But I chose those because they seemed quite restrictive and interesting. And as I'm going through trying to build it, it's been very difficult to build what feels like a cohesive deck. And I think the games are kind of going to go long and be very decision rich, which is my favorite type of Magic to play when I'm not beating down. So I'm looking forward to that. I've started with a jury build that's artifact based and tries to gain a lot of value from churning through your artifacts, playing a giant jury, and then finding some way to sacrifice it, bring it back, leverage some artifacts that go long. But it's been really surprising to me how many powerful or mana sink artifacts are rares and mythics and aren't uncommons.
Yeah, we kind of all sat in the chat yesterday, like individually building decks with these restrictions. And one thing to keep in mind, it's actually 3 restrictions, right? Because you can only play one creature that has to be your commander. So that's 99 other cards in your deck that cannot be creature types. You have to adhere to the peasant restriction as well. So you already have the rarity restriction kind of cutting out a really large portion of cards that would be available to you. And then you have the third restriction, obviously, of you can't attack. So you have to find a different strategy altogether, which kind of combines with like you can only have one creature, but like your commander can't attack, which is going to be one of the avenues you would automatically think of. So we were all looking through like decks and putting things together, and it felt like every time I tried to build a deck, I got to about 75 cards, including the lands, and then I would have had to dig pretty deep for like the rest of the cards to be filler. But it does mean that we're probably looking at a much slower environment this time around, and it seems like people landed on a lot of black decks with thought distortion in them. So we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, you added a bunch of restrictions this time, which personally I like. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 people griping that like this was a really hard one to parse out, but at the same time, like, that's kind of the point, right? Like, it's kind of the point. I personally like the more restrictive things rather than the more open things, because it makes you play with cards that you and I have probably never played with, So I get why you picked those. I do think you have probably created a very tough environment for a number of people, though, including myself. So kudos to you on that, and we'll see if you can run it back for another 9-0, in which case you get to just pick the restrictions again. So you also, I wanted to ask one more thing. You, the person who picks the restrictions, the winner, also gets to replace those stipulations with new ones that get added to the stipulation file. Did you want to talk about those real quick? The 2 new ones that you added?
The ones I chose were, the first one that came to my mind was this idea of like the Iron Chef, like secret ingredients or something. So often with these, you're really you're just like, oh, if I just had like one rare, that would be super great. Or there's this really cool card I've always wanted to build around. And the idea that someone could reveal like 10 or so cards that you can use in your color combinations really stood out to me, because I think one thing I tried to promote in my cubes are cards that are powerful but require a lot of playing around to get used to. So, for example, something like Palantir of Orthanc is a card that is powerful, but people need experience using that. And like if it were me, I would put that on the bonus sheet because I think it leads to really interesting games.
Right. So
When,
the bonus sheet, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said it's like guild related cards or 2-color cards, or am I misremembering that?
yeah, I think I landed on that just because it felt cleaner for not everyone who might have the same vision in mind as I do. Um, but to me, I would envision it as kind of like a full booster, like a full 15 cards that anyone can use. That
Right.
feels like it could be a lot. So I just sort of simplified it down to one of each guild pair.
Yeah, so just to clarify, that stipulation whenever somebody gets around to picking it is a bonus sheet of guild related card or 2-color cards, about I think you said 10 to 15, and whoever picks that stipulation for the upcoming league will get to pick a booster of extra cards that people can pull from, which breaks the rarity restrictions. One of the things you can do with your stipulations is break the peasant rarity restrictions. There's also evergreen stipulations that you can pick, like anything's allowed or alchemy's allowed this week. So if you win and you want to make sure the next league lets you play super powerful stuff, that's something you can do. So that was a really cool one. And then you had the Junder Dome.
Yeah, my personal cube is a Jund cube that is based around that modern idea of Jund back in its heyday from Shards of Alara to current days. And I really love that cube. It's become kind of my cube identity outside of this Discord. Like I've brought it to CubeCon and Cali Cube Champs, both of which I'm excited for this year. And it's just been my baby, and I love seeing like people just go to town with haymakers and thought seizes and lightnings. So I figured that would be a pretty good restriction as a gloating victory one, to be like, okay, great, I won. Now you all must play in my arena.
How many Mr. Orpheos do you think we're going to see that week?
I don't know, probably a few, because that is the only, I think, uncommon Jund commander, right?
That's one of the things that struck me is there are the only 3-color commanders at uncommon, I believe, on the entire arena card pool are the Streets of New Capenna ones, right? So
It is, yeah. It's a little unfortunate we don't have a wedge cycle.
yeah, I mean, maybe we get one eventually, but for now, like if you're building a 3-color deck, like you're building one of 5 commanders, which means that you're gonna see monocolored and 2-color commanders like way more often than anything above that, and I don't think there are any 4 or 5-color uncommon commanders on the card pool. So we'll see when we get Junder Dome. I know we got some Jund players in the cube, and if you win again, like I don't know if you would pick yours or combine it with other things that exist or not, but we'll have to see. But for now, we're working with single creature decks. This next one's going to be a struggle. We'll see how the matches go, but I do wish you best of luck on the second league. Hopefully I can do a little bit better myself, but anything else you wanted to touch on here before I let you go?
I think if you are out there listening to this and you enjoy playing Brawl, but you're kind of sick of playing against Defense of the Hearts or Ragavans or Paradox Engines, anything that really strikes you, joining this league is a really great way to flex your deck building skills, get you interested in some new cards, and really put those uncommon and common wild cards to use.
That's the real kicker, is we're trying to get people to use their common wild cards on something. Well, I mean, I appreciate the plug. I was giving you an opportunity to talk about anything else for your deck, but if you wanted to plug the community, I'll take that too. But thanks for hanging out and talking about your deck. It was a really sweet one. I hope that we get some cool decks moving forward as well. But with that, I am going to go ahead and close out. So thank you, TPug. Thank you to everybody who's watching this. If you want to get in on the Brawl action like TPug said, there's a link down below to the Discord. All you have to do is join up and ask where's the Brawl stuff at, and we will guide you to this. At some point, if we get too many people, we'll fragment off into smaller groups. I think right now we're sitting at about 11 or 12, which does mean you're playing like 11 matches for every league, which can be a little bit daunting. So we've still got some kinks to work out. We're getting a lot of player feedback from the people who are actually participating, so if you want to join up and you have feedback to give, we would love to hear that as well. But thanks to everybody for watching. My name is Timothy with Jank Diver Gaming, and we will catch you all next time.